I'm 52 years old and I had a really bad stroke. The trip's already paid for, honey. Just concentrate on getting better, my husband said as he zipped up the suitcase. And off they went, the whole family, leaving me in the dust. From my hospital bed, I immediately rang up my notary. When they got back all tan and happy, a surprise was waiting for them. The morning light spilled through the sheer curtains in the big kitchen of their fancy Atlanta home. Zenia Sterling, or Zenny as her friends called her, was making breakfast for the family. She moved with precision, carefully slicing cheese for the grits, every so often checking the stock market updates on her tablet. A few silver strands peeked out from her dark hair, which was pulled back into a neat, professional bun. At 52, Zenny looked fit, disciplined, and full of energy, qualities she'd sharpened over decades as a top financial analyst. The sound of running water came from the master bathroom. Langston, her husband, was finally awake. Zenny sighed and put the third cup of coffee on the counter. Their daughter, Solange, was already sitting at the polished granite island, totally absorbed in her phone. Mom, can you spot me $1,500 until payday? My agency is dragging their feet on my commission check, and I need to pay my SoulCycle membership, Solange asked without looking up. Zenny just nodded, already opening her banking app. These money requests had become so common that they didn't even need questions or a conversation anymore. Transferred, Zenny replied dryly, sending the money before getting back to scrambling the eggs. Langston wandered into the doorway in a worn robe, his hair still wet, and the familiar bags under his eyes were really noticeable. 28 years of marriage had changed him from a promising history scholar into a tired community college professor, stuck playing second fiddle in the family. Morning, he mumbled, going to his seat. Langston, don't forget I can't pick you up later, Zenny said, setting down the plates. I have a meeting with clients at 6. Langston sighed, but he quickly quieted down under her steady gaze. Fine, I'll take Marta. Solange finally looked up from her phone. Speaking of money, Mom, have you thought about helping me with the down payment on the new Escalade? Mine's practically falling apart. Solange, we talked about this, Zenny replied calmly, but with a steely edge in her voice. I just paid for your 2-week trip to Cancun last month. But Mom, you know I have to look the part at the agency, Solange insisted. A reliable car is part of the image. How am I supposed to drive high-end clients around in a beat-up SUV? Zenny looked at her daughter without saying anything. Solange was so much like her younger self. She had the same drive, but it wasn't aimed at a career, it was aimed at a life of luxury. After getting her degree in tourism, she'd gotten a job at a fancy travel agency, but she preferred talking about the job to actually doing it. I'll think about it, Zenny finally said, even though she knew she'd give in eventually. She always did. The front door slammed and Akira, her youngest son, burst into the kitchen. At 25, he was a perpetual student, always searching for the perfect job, and he'd already gone through 3 since getting his law degree. He was currently working as a paralegal at a small firm, dreaming of a real legal fight. Hey everybody, he exclaimed cheerfully, kissing his mother on the cheek. Mom, you're the best. Thanks for the transfer. I already got my stuff out of the old place. I'm starting at a new firm tomorrow. Again, Akira? Zenny asked, sounding tired. We agreed you'd stick with one place for at least 6 months. Mom, there were no opportunities for growth there. This is real legal practice and they're talking about future partnership. Akira spoke quickly and excitedly, like he always did when he was defending his impulsive choices. Zenny shook her head and checked the time. I have to run. I'll be late tonight. I have a management meeting. She quickly finished her coffee, put her documents into her leather briefcase, straightened her tailored suit and headed for the door. Langston, don't forget to run the dishwasher and take the chicken out of the freezer. Solange, water the plants. Akira, take out the recycling. Routine morning commands met with routine nods. Zenny knew half of it wouldn't get done, and she'd end up doing it herself later. The whole day at the top financial consulting firm on Peachtree Street, where Zenny worked as a lead analyst, was filled with meetings and conference calls. After lunch, The principal of her nephew's high school called about some behavioral problems. Zenny promised to talk to her sister. Then she had to deal with Akira's overdue loan payment. The bank had sent a notice of default. That evening on the crowded MARTA train home, Zenny was scrolling through pictures of resorts on her phone. The idea had started a week earlier when she saw an ad for the Maldives. Turquoise ocean, white sand beaches, overwater bungalows. The last time the whole family had gone on vacation together was 3 years ago, and even then it was just a quick trip to Cancun because Langston hated flying. I need to give them a gift, Zenny thought, looking at the luxurious resort pictures. Akira will settle down, Solange will grow up, and Langston and I. Maybe we can remember why we fell in love. No one was home. A note from Langston was on the counter. Went to an alumni thing. Back late. The chicken was still frozen, the plants were dry, the recycling hadn't been touched. Zenny automatically did the household chores, ate a reheated bowl of soup, and sat down at her laptop. She worked on a financial plan for the next 6 months until midnight. If she tightened her belt, took on extra projects, and put off the bathroom renovation she'd been planning, they could afford the Maldives by May. All she had to do was work 7 days a week for the next 4 months. And so began her relentless grind, getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to finish chores before work, and getting home at 9 o'clock in the evening with extra projects. Weekends were spent glued to her laptop. The rare calls she got were only for questions. Mom, where are the winter coats? Zenny, I can't find a clean shirt. Mom, can you send me another $50 for an Uber? By February, Zenny had finalized the hotel and the dates. She booked the biggest overwater villa, with 2 bedrooms and a private plunge pool. She paid for the flights, insurance, and transfers, all for the happy faces she imagined seeing when she told them about the gift in early March. With everything paid for and booked, Zenny gathered the family. I have a surprise for you, she said, looking at their confused faces. In May, we're all flying to the Maldives for 2 weeks. The reaction was better than she could have imagined. Solange squealed and rushed to hug her mother. Akira was suspicious at first, but then he frantically Googled the resort. Even Langston smiled and hugged Zenny awkwardly. That's incredible, he muttered. Are you sure we can afford this? I calculated everything, Zenny smiled, enjoying the rare moment of family unity. The next 2 months flew by in a flurry of preparation. Solange was constantly buying new swimwear and beach outfits, always asking her mother's opinion. Akira enthusiastically researched scuba tours and local attractions. Langston, overcoming his fear of flying, read reviews about the flights and watched videos about the tropical islands. And Zenny worked. The new project turned out to be more complicated than she'd expected. Management demanded results. Clients changed the terms. Late-night meetings, stress, constant sleep deprivation. But she kept going, knowing that soon they'd all be together, happy by the ocean. A week before the trip, Solange came to her with an unexpected request. Mom, can I bring Kofi? You know, the guy I'm dating. He can buy his own ticket. He just needs a spot in our villa. Zenny tried not to get annoyed. Solange, this is a family vacation. Besides, the villa is only meant for 4 people. But Mom, we've been together for 6 months. He's practically family, Solange whined like she used to do when she wanted something as a kid. No, Zenny said firmly. And that's final. Solange slammed the door. She stayed silent and sulky during dinner. Langston, as usual, tried to stay out of the arguments between his wife and daughter. Akira was too busy planning excursions to notice the drama. 3 days before their flight, on a Wednesday, Zenny woke up feeling like her head was full of lead. Nausea churned in her stomach, and her right arm was tingling. I'm just overworked, she thought. It'll pass. She struggled out of bed, trying not to wake Langston. In the bathroom, Zenny splashed cold water on her face and looked at herself in the mirror. A pale face, dark circles under her eyes, and new wrinkles that hadn't been there a month ago. It's fine. I'll relax in the Maldives, she thought, reaching into the medicine cabinet for a pain reliever. She just had to hold on for 3 more days, but fate had other plans. That May morning, Zinni was planning to make a celebratory breakfast. With the flight just 3 days away, she wanted to get everyone excited about the vacation. Biscuits and gravy for Langston, pancakes for Solange, and bacon and eggs for Akira. A little bit of everyone's southern favorites. Zinni was carefully chopping vegetables when she felt the knife slip out of her suddenly numb fingers. A weird feeling spread across her whole right arm, then her leg. Zinni tried to lean on the countertop, but her body wouldn't listen. Everything started spinning. "Langston," she called out, barely a whisper, and her voice sounded strange alien. Zinni tried to take a step toward the door and collapsed onto the floor, knocking over a stool. The crash woke Langston. "What the Zinni?" He rushed into the kitchen in his unbuttoned pajamas and froze when he saw his wife on the floor. "God, what happened?" Zinni wanted to answer, but her tongue felt swollen and wouldn't work. All she could do was stare at her husband, trying to show him the fear and pain that had locked up her body. "Call 911 quickly." Langston frantically looked for his phone, bumping into the furniture. "Don't move. Everything will be okay." There was a noise from Solange's room. "What's all that noise so early in the morning?" she asked sleepily, peeking out the door. "Your mom is sick." "Call 911 now," Langston yelled, kneeling next to his wife. Solange, seeing her mother on the floor, covered her mouth in shock. "Mom, what is it?" "I don't know. Call the ambulance faster." The next few minutes were a blur for Zinni. Scared screams, hands trying to lift her. Akira's voice rushing into the kitchen. "What? How? When did this happen?" Her consciousness faded in and out. The ambulance got there in 12 minutes. A young medic quickly checked the situation. "Looks like a stroke. She needs to go to the hospital right away," he said calmly, giving instructions to his partner. "Who's going with us?" "I will," Langston said, stepping forward. "She's my wife." Zinni was carefully lifted onto the stretcher. At the last moment, already in the doorway, she found the strength to squeeze Solange's hand weakly, like she was trying to say, "Don't worry. I'll be fine." Everything happened fast in the hospital emergency room. The attending neurologist, a heavy-set woman with short hair, quickly examined Zinni. "Clear signs of an ischemic stroke. We need to do a CT scan and get her to the ICU immediately." Zinni's gurney disappeared behind double doors, leaving a distraught Langston in the hallway. He sank into a plastic chair, covering his face with his hands. His phone was vibrating non-stop. Solange and Akira wanted updates. The doctor came out 2 hours later. "Are you Zinnia Sterling's husband?" "Yes," Langston said, jumping up. "How is she?" "Ischemic stroke in the middle cerebral artery territory. Her condition is critical but stable. We gave her thrombolytics and did the initial procedures. She's in the ICU now. The next 24 hours are crucial." "Will she live?" Langston's voice shook. "The prognosis is cautiously positive. It's good she got here so quickly, but she's facing a long and difficult recovery. Right-sided paralysis and impaired speech." The doctor spoke, and Langston felt like he was falling. "You can visit her tomorrow if her condition stabilizes." Langston got home that evening, exhausted from waiting at the hospital and dealing with the paperwork. Solange and Akira met him in the hallway. "Well, what did they say?" Solange was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. "A stroke?" Langston replied tiredly, taking off his coat. "A bad one. She's in the ICU." "Oh my God," Solange whispered. "So what now?" Akira asked. "When will she be discharged?" "I don't know, son." Langston walked into the kitchen and turned on the kettle without thinking. The knife Zinni had dropped was still on the floor, and the unfinished vegetables were still on the cutting board. It was like time had stopped. Akira rubbed his forehead. "What about the Maldives? The flight is in 3 days." Langston and Solange looked at him, confused. "What Maldives?" Solange snapped. "Don't you get it? Mom had a stroke." "I get it," Akira retorted. "It's all paid for and booked. Mom worked so hard for this. I'm just wondering what we do with the tickets and the reservations. Langston collapsed into a chair. I don't know. I'll have to look at the documents. Maybe we can get some of the money back. The next 3 days were spent in the hospital corridors. Zenny was moved from the ICU to a regular room, but she still had a long way to go. Her right side was mostly non-functional, and her speech was really impaired, but she was alert, which the doctor said was a good sign. On the 4th day after it happened, Langston, Solange, and Akira went into the hospital room. Zenny lifted herself up a little on her pillows when she saw them. Pale, worn out, and with a distant look in her eyes, she seemed like a ghost of the strong, energetic Zenny she used to be. Hello, she said softly, the one word taking a lot of effort. How are you feeling? Langston sat on the edge of the bed, but instead of flowers or fruit, he was holding a leather folder full of papers. Rehab will take at least 6 months, Zenny managed to say slowly, her words slurred. An awkward silence hung in the air. Solange fidgeted with the strap of her handbag, a birthday gift from her mother. Mom, we were talking, Solange finally started, about the Maldives trip. Yes, it has to be postponed, Zenny replied, struggling to speak. Actually, Langston cleared his throat, not looking at his wife. Zenaya, we talked to the travel agent. It would cost almost the whole amount to reschedule or cancel, so we'd basically be throwing the money away. Zenny felt a chill go down her spine. What are you suggesting? It was hard to get the words out, but she needed to understand what her husband was getting at. The tickets are already paid for, honey. You just focus on getting better. Langston tried to smile, but it looked forced. The kids and I will fly out just as planned. You need peace and quiet right now. And us? Well, it's silly to waste all that money. Zenny stared at them, not believing what she was hearing. She was paralyzed after a stroke, and they were planning to go to the resort she'd paid for with her own money. Who will stay with me? Was all she could ask. We arranged everything with Miss Ruby, the neighbor. She'll stop by every day, Akira said quickly. And you have nurses and doctors here. You're in good hands, Mom. Langston put the folder on the bedside table. This is the power of attorney document for managing your accounts. We'll need access to cash for spending money and expenses while we're there. Excursions, you know. Everything in the Maldives is expensive. Zenny looked silently at the ceiling, feeling a tear roll down her cheek. She had lived her whole life for them, saving for a rainy day, never treating herself to anything. And this was how they thanked her. Will you sign it? Langston handed her a pen. Her hand barely worked, but Zenny found the strength to take it. Of course, she whispered, and signed the document with a shaky, uneven signature. What else could she do? If she made a scene in her condition, or tried to stop them from going, they'd just do whatever they wanted anyway, and she didn't have the strength to fight them. When they left, talking about which swimsuits to pack, Zenny stared out the window at the magnolia tree in the hospital courtyard. The room was quiet except for the beeping of the monitors. Outside, the leaves rustled softly, and she could hear laughter from the playground. Life went on, but for Zenny it seemed to have frozen in this sterile room that smelled like medicine. Miss Ruby came by that evening, a kind, heavy-set woman in her late 70s, carrying a bag full of sweet potato pies. Zenaya, honey, she said sadly, seeing her neighbor. What on earth happened to you? I came right over as soon as I heard. Langston had just quickly told her they had an emergency trip to take, and asked her to check in on Zenny. Emergency trip? Zenny laughed bitterly to herself. What a convenient story to tell the old lady. Thank you, Ruby, Zenny managed to say with difficulty. You shouldn't have. Nonsense. We're neighbors, aren't we? Miss Ruby waved her hand, settling into a chair. I brought you some homemade pie and a jar of sweet tea. That hospital food is something else. The elderly woman talked non-stop, sharing the latest neighborhood news, gossip about other neighbors, and stories about her many grandchildren. Zenny listened without really paying attention. The cold feeling she'd had since talking to her family wouldn't go away. The next day, Nurse Amani Jones, a woman Zenny's age with kind but tired eyes, came into the room. How are we feeling today, Miss Sterling? she asked, checking the foredrip. Zinni wanted to say fine, but she unexpectedly burst into tears instead. Tears ran down her face and she couldn't stop them. What is it? The nurse asked, worried, sitting next to her, speaking slowly and carefully. Zinni told her what had happened. The trip she'd planned for the whole family. The betrayal of her husband and children going to the Maldives while she was lying there paralyzed, and the power of attorney. I didn't even look at what I signed, she finished. Nurse Amani frowned, picked up the folder from the table, and studied the document closely. Suddenly she gasped. Miss Sterling, this is a general power of attorney over all your assets. Not just your accounts, but your real estate, stocks, and bonds. They can manage everything you own. Zinni felt like the room was spinning. How could they do that? Had they only ever seen her as a wallet, someone to provide for them for all those years? The betrayal was so huge she could hardly breathe. We need to take care of this right away, Nurse Amani said firmly. Is there someone you trust, a lawyer or a notary, that we can call? Zinni thought for a minute, then remembered Senator Josiah Green, a corporate attorney she worked with at the bank years ago. They had stayed friendly, seeing each other at events sometimes. Finding all her strength, she told the nurse his phone number. Thank you, Zinni whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. You just focus on getting well, Nurse Amani said gently, patting her hand. We'll handle this. That evening Miss Ruby came by again, bringing biscuits and news. Your folks left for their trip. Zinaya saw the taxi pull up to the condo, loaded up the bags and drove off. They looked happy as can be, smiling away. Langston told me you gave them your blessing so the tickets wouldn't go to waste. You're such a good woman, thinking of your family even in this state. Zinni closed her eyes so the neighbor wouldn't see the pain. Gave them my blessing. What a convenient way to put it. Thank you for stopping by, was all she could say. Zinni couldn't sleep that night. The quiet sounds of the hospital drifted in from the doorway. Nurses' footsteps, the beeping of monitors, distant voices. And somewhere up in the dark sky, a plane was carrying her family toward warm seas and white sand. How could I have been so blind? She thought, staring at the ceiling. So many years living with people and not seeing their true faces. So many years giving everything and getting nothing back. For the first time in years, Zinni felt completely alone. And in that loneliness, in the silence of the hospital room, lit by the streetlight coming through the window, she made a decision that would change her whole future. The next day, as the morning sun barely peeked through the hospital blinds, there was a quiet knock at the door. Zinni turned her head with difficulty. Senator Josiah Green stood in the doorway, a tall, well-dressed man in his early 60s with short, gray hair. He was holding a leather briefcase and a small bunch of white chrysanthemums. Good morning, Miss Sterling, he said, stopping in the doorway. May I come in, Josiah? Zinni tried to smile, but it was just a weak grimace. Thank you for coming. The notary came in, put the flowers in a pitcher of water, and sat in the chair next to the bed. He looked around the room carefully, noticing that there weren't any other flowers or signs that anyone had come to visit. Your nurse called me, he said, explaining the situation. He spoke calmly without being overly sympathetic, which Zinni really appreciated. Feeling pitted was too much to handle right now. I brought the documents. Where is this power of attorney? Zinni nodded toward the bedside table. Josiah Green picked up the folder, looked through the papers carefully, and shook his head. Yes, a general power of attorney with extended powers, giving them the right to sell all your property, handle your bank accounts and sell securities, he said, frowning. Who drew up this document? My husband, Zinni said with difficulty. I figured. The notary nodded. There are some problems with how it was done. First, there wasn't a notary present when it was signed, which makes it questionable right away. Second, it doesn't have the detailed description of the authority that's needed for this kind of POA. He took out some forms from his briefcase and put them on the rolling table. We'll draw up a statement canceling the power of attorney immediately. Then we'll notify the banks to freeze everything in your accounts until we can figure out what's going on. Nurse Imani Jones came in with a tray of tea and crackers. "I thought you could use something," she smiled, putting the tray on the table. "How's it going?" "We're working to make things right," Josiah Green replied, nodding to the nurse. "Miss Sterling, I need some information. Which banks should I notify? Do you have any safety deposit boxes? Any property besides your house?" For the next hour, Zenny answered the notary's questions slowly and carefully, even though it was hard for her to speak. Nurse Imani helped when she had trouble saying a long name or string of numbers. Josiah Green filled out the forms, asking questions now and then. "We'll cancel the power of attorney today," he said firmly, finishing writing. "If I could offer a suggestion, it's time to look at your other legal documents, especially your will." Zenny paused. She had written her will years ago, before Akira was born. It was simple back then. Her husband and kids would get equal shares of everything. She hadn't looked at it since. "Yes," she said firmly after a pause. "I want to change the will." Josiah Green looked at her closely. "Are you sure? That's a very serious decision, especially considering your condition." "Exactly. Considering my condition," Zenny shot back, finally getting her tongue to cooperate. "I see things more clearly now than ever before." The notary agreed with a nod. "All right then, let's go over the specifics." While Zen's family was busy packing their bags, not even bothering to call the hospital, she, with the assistance of her notary, not only canceled the power of attorney but also drew up a brand new will. The bulk of her estate was now earmarked for a neuro-rehabilitation charity that helped stroke victims, along with a generous donation to Imani Jones, who in just a few short days had shown her more compassion than her own flesh and blood had in years. Zenny also made arrangements for an endowment to be set up to give financial support to up-and-coming neuro-rehabilitation specialists. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Josiah Green asked cautiously as he was putting the final touches on the paperwork. "Absolutely," Zenny replied with conviction, feeling an odd sense of release wash over her. For the first time in what felt like ages, she was making a choice solely based on her own desires and what she wanted. Nurse Imani, upon hearing about the will, shook her head firmly. "Miss Sterling, I simply cannot accept this. We've only just met." "You're the only person who has actually cared," Zenny said, speaking slowly but clearly. "Please accept it as a token of my gratitude." Josiah Green stowed the documents away in his briefcase. "Now let's move on to the practical steps. I'll be sending notifications to all the banks where you have accounts. I'll block any real estate transactions made in your name. And I'll set up legal safeguards to protect your assets throughout your rehabilitation." Zenny nodded, a look of gratitude on her face. "Thank you. It's my pleasure entirely." The notary got to his feet, getting ready to leave. "I'll be sure to visit you regularly. We'll keep an eye on things together." Once he had left, Nurse Imani helped Zenny get into a more comfortable position in the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Strange," Zenny admitted. "Like I just woke up from a really long sleep." "That's a great sign," the nurse said with a smile. "It means your recovery has begun. And not just the physical kind either." That evening, as Zenny was drifting off to sleep, the phone on the bedside table buzzed softly. She managed to reach for it with her good hand. Langston's name was displayed on the screen. With a composure that even she found surprising, Zenny pressed the answer button. "Yes, baby. It's me." Langston's voice sounded anxious and strained. "We're at the airport. There's a problem with the payment. For some reason the card isn't working." Zenny didn't say anything, listening to her husband's panicked breathing on the other end of the line. "Are you hearing me?" he asked after a moment of silence. "We need to pay the baggage fees and for the unlimited Wi-Fi at the resort. The card is being declined." "Unfortunately, no," Zenny answered calmly, surprised by how clear and steady her voice sounded. "The power of attorney has been revoked, and I've made some significant changes to our financial relationship." "What do you mean, changes?" Langston's voice was starting to sound panicked. "We're at the airport. We need the money. You have your own cards and your own savings," Zenny said. amazed by the serenity in her own voice. Enjoy your vacation on your own dime. Zanaya, you're not well. This is a result of the stroke. You need therapy, Langston yelled into the phone, but she had already pressed the end call button. The phone immediately started ringing again and then again. Notifications about messages started popping up. First from Langston, then from Solange, and then from Akira. Zenny silenced the phone and placed it face down. For the first time in years, she didn't rush to solve someone else's problems. The next morning, she was woken up by voices in the hallway. It sounded like Langston was trying to force his way into the room, but the duty nurse wouldn't let him. You don't understand. She's my wife. His indignant voice carried into Zenny's room. She's made an irrational decision. She's not herself. Visiting hours are strictly from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., the nurse replied, remaining unfazed. And according to our records, the patient's condition is stable and showing positive progress. If you want to speak with her, please come back during visiting hours. The sound of footsteps faded away, and silence returned. Zenny closed her eyes, feeling the tension of the last few days finally begin to dissipate. She didn't know if they had actually gone on the trip or not, and for the first time she didn't even care. At noon, Nurse Amani came in. You have a visitor, she announced. May I let him in? Zenny tensed, thinking that Langston had returned, but Josiah Green appeared in the doorway. All the documents have been signed and finalized. Notifications have been sent. He announced without any preamble. Your accounts are secure. Your property is safe. Now you can focus on getting better. Thank you, Zenny said sincerely. What about my family? According to my information, they did indeed fly out, the notary replied. Your husband had to use his own credit card to cover the additional expenses. Zenny nodded. Strangely, the news didn't cause her any pain, only a sense of relief. Now that she had made her decision, she could finally move forward. I called a friend of mine who is a rehabilitation specialist, Josiah Green continued. He's ready to oversee your recovery program. He's a very good doctor. He used to work in Switzerland. I'm not sure if I can afford it right now, Zenny stammered, thinking about her frozen accounts. Don't worry about that, the notary said with a smile. You have sufficient funds in a cash account that wasn't included in the power of attorney. And on top of that, your insurance will cover a significant portion of the rehabilitation costs. For the next 2 weeks, Zenny dedicated herself entirely to her recovery. With the same determination that she had once used to build her career, she now fought to regain her mobility and her speech. Nurse Amani helped her with her exercises, brought her books on neuroplasticity, and gave her encouragement whenever Zenny felt like giving up. The rehabilitation specialist, Dr. Elijah Vance, was demanding but incredibly effective. Listen, Miss Sterling, he would say as he helped her perform complicated exercises for her right hand. The brain has an amazing ability to heal itself, but it needs 2 things: consistent practice and a positive mindset. I can provide the first one. The second is entirely up to you. And Zenny truly tried. Every single day, she did all the prescribed exercises, forcing her unresponsive muscles to cooperate. With the help of a speech pathologist, she worked to regain her speech, repeating difficult tongue twisters. In the evenings she read aloud, recording herself so she could keep track of her progress. Josiah Green visited her regularly, helping her sort out the legal matters. They moved all of her accounts to a new bank, changed all of the passwords and access information, and prepared the paperwork for the division of property. Are you certain about the divorce? He asked one day as he was filling out yet another form. Perhaps you should wait until you're fully recovered. No, Zenny replied firmly. The slightest hint of her former uncertainty had vanished from her voice. It's precisely now, when I'm physically vulnerable, that I need legal protection. The notary nodded in understanding. A sensible decision. There was no word from her family. Zenny's phone remained silent. No calls, no messages. Sometimes she would look at photos of the resort in the Maldives, picturing them sunbathing, swimming, and living it up. Strangely, these thoughts didn't bring her any bitterness, only a quiet resolve to forge her own path. The day before her family was scheduled to return from the Maldives, Zinni was transferred from the hospital to a rehabilitation center. The room was bright and airy, with a large window that overlooked a park. Josiah Green personally accompanied her during the transfer, making sure that all the necessary paperwork was in order. "You'll be comfortable here," he said, helping her get settled in. "And more importantly, you'll receive professional recovery treatment." Zinni looked at him with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for all your help." "You already have," the notary said with a smile. "With your tenacity and your will to live. You know, Miss Sterling, I've seen a lot of people in crisis. Most of them fall apart. You're one of the rare few who come out stronger." That same evening Miss Ruby called, sounding agitated and confused. "Zanaya, honey, I don't know what to think. Your folks came back from their trip, and they can't get into the condo. The locks have been changed. Langston called me asking if I knew what was going on. I told him I had no idea and that you were still in the hospital." "It's all right, Ruby," Zinni replied calmly. "Supposed to be that way. But what about them? Where are they going to live?" "Solange has her own apartment," Zinni reminded her. "And so does Akira. Langston can stay with the children." "Oh, Zanaya," Miss Ruby said, clearly bewildered. "What happened between you all?" "Just life," Zinni answered. "Sometimes it teaches you unexpected lessons." An hour later, the phone started ringing furiously. It was Langston. Zinni stared at the screen for a long time, trying to decide whether or not to answer. Finally, she pressed the button. "Hello, what's going on?" Her husband's outraged voice burst into the quiet room. "They won't let us into the house." "That is no longer your house," she replied calmly. "I filed for divorce. You can move in with the children. They have their own places, which incidentally were purchased with my money." "Zanaya, you're not well. This is a result of the stroke. You need therapy," Langston shouted. "On the contrary, I'm finally myself," Zinni replied, feeling her voice regain its confidence. "And yes, the stroke definitely clarified a lot of things. You can't do this to us. We're your family." "Family?" Zinni laughed bitterly. "Family doesn't abandon a loved one in the hospital to go on vacation. Family doesn't deceive you with powers of attorney. Family supports you in times of distress rather than thinking only of their own advantage." "Zanaya, listen. All the documents are with my lawyer," she interrupted. "He'll be in touch with you to discuss the terms of the divorce." Zinni pressed the end call button and switched off her phone. A peaceful silence settled in the room. Outside the window the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Zinni looked at the explosion of color, feeling a strange sense of peace. For the first time in many years, she was completely in control of her life and her future. And even though months of difficult rehabilitation and legal battles lay ahead, she knew that she would make it through. She slept through the night without any sleeping pills. She didn't have any nightmares about illness or betrayal. She dreamed of the ocean vast, calm with gentle waves rolling onto white sand. She stood on the shore strong, healthy and free, watching the dawn paint the horizon in the soft colors of the sunrise. A new day, a new life, and she was ready for the journey ahead. 6 months later, the morning sun shining through the light curtains woke Zinni before her alarm. She had been living in her new studio apartment for half a year, and every morning started the same way, with a feeling of freedom and tranquility. Zinni slowly got out of bed. Her right leg still felt a bit stiff in the mornings, but it was getting stronger every day. She put her cane to the side. She preferred to walk around the apartment without it, working on her balance. She walked over to the window. Life was already in full swing down below. Young mothers with strollers were hurrying to the park. Older neighbors were sitting on benches with their newspapers. Runners were out for their morning jogs. Zinni smiled at her reflection in the window. She had changed a lot over the past few months, not just on the inside but on the outside as well. She had traded her severe business haircut for a softer, more feminine style. She had stopped wearing dark suits and started wearing lighter, looser clothing. Even her posture was different, more relaxed, but still confident. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Nurse Imani Jones's name lit up the screen. "Good morning," her friend said cheerfully. "Are you ready for the big day?" "As ready as anyone can be for the opening of her own center," Zenny replied, with a hint of anxiety in her voice. "I'm a little nervous." "That's perfectly normal," Imani reassured her. "I'll pick you up at 10 o'clock. Everything's ready. Just a few final touches left to do." After breakfast, Zenny carefully chose her outfit. Today was a special day. The grand opening of the new life support center for stroke patients, which Zenny and Imani had co-founded. What had started as a small idea for a support group had quickly blossomed into a full-fledged organization with an office, a staff of consultants, and some very ambitious plans. Zenny chose a light blue dress with a wide belt and a pair of comfortable, yet elegant, low-heeled shoes. Looking at herself in the mirror, she couldn't help but notice how her face had changed. The wrinkles hadn't disappeared, but her eyes were brighter and clearer. She had that inner glow that even the most expensive cosmetics couldn't replicate. The doorbell rang. Instead of Imani, Akira was standing on the doorstep, looking pale, worn out, and wearing a wrinkled shirt. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "can I come in? I need to talk to you." Zenny silently stepped aside, allowing her son into the apartment. They had only seen each other twice in the last 6 months. Both of those meetings had ended in arguments and mutual accusations. "What's wrong?" she asked once they were sitting down in the living room. Akira nervously clasped his hands together. I'm in trouble. I got laid off from the firm, and I haven't been able to find another job for 2 weeks. Zenny looked closely at her son, noticing the dark circles under his eyes, the messy stubble, and his trembling hands. "And what do you want from me?" she asked bluntly. "I need help, Mom." Akira looked down at the floor. "I only have enough money to cover rent this month. After that, I don't know what I'm going to do." In the past, Zenny would have immediately reached for her wallet or transferred the necessary amount. But now she simply shook her head. "Akira, you're a lawyer. You have a degree. You have experience, even if it's not a lot. Why did you come here asking for money again instead of asking for advice or support?" "What's the difference?" he replied, his voice suddenly filled with anger. "You always helped me out, and now just because of some stupid grudge you've abandoned all of us." "It's not because of a grudge," Zenny calmly replied. "It's because I realized that I was actually hurting you by being overly helpful." She looked at him with genuine, unwavering love. "Take a good look at yourself, Akira. You're 26 years old, and you still haven't learned to stand on your own 2 feet. That's cruel," he whispered. "It's the truth," Zenny said softly. "And you can be angry, you can be hurt, but deep down, you know that I'm right." She walked over to her son and, for the first time in a long time, placed her hand on his shoulder. "I can help you find a job. I have connections in the legal field. I can give you recommendations for interviews, but there will be no more money, Akira. It won't help you or our relationship." He looked at his mother in disbelief. "You're serious? You won't even lend me money until I find a job?" "I won't even lend you money," Zenny confirmed, "because I know that as soon as you have my money, your motivation to look for work will immediately disappear." Akira jumped to his feet. "You've changed, Mom. You've become tough, heartless." "No, son," Zenny said, shaking her head. "For the first time in years, I've become myself. And the strangest thing is that none of you even noticed it before. I was just a function, a resource that was there to serve your needs." As he left, slamming the door behind him, Zenny felt not pain, but a strange sense of peace. In the past, a conversation like that with her son would have thrown her off for days. Now she simply sighed and went back to her preparations. She had important work to do, work that gave her strength and meaning. Imani arrived right on time. Seeing her friend, she immediately knew that something had happened. "It's fine," Akira stopped by. Zenny answered briefly. "He asked for money. I refused and offered to help him find a job." Amani nodded approvingly. Good for you, even though I imagine it wasn't easy. You know, Zenny said thoughtfully. Before it would have been unbearable, but now I feel like I found some kind of inner anchor that was never there before. On the way to the center, they discussed the final preparations for the opening. Over the months that they had been working together, their friendship had grown stronger. They complemented each other perfectly. Zenny with her organizational skills, her business sense, and her connections, and Amani with her medical expertise, her empathy, and her ability to connect with even the most challenging patients. The new Life Support Center was located in a small but cozy space on the ground floor of an apartment building. Light-colored walls, comfortable furniture, and a well-thought-out navigation system for people with limited mobility. Every single detail had been carefully planned out. As the scheduled time approached, the first visitors began to arrive: stroke patients and their family members. Zenny greeted the guests at the entrance, making sure to give each person her undivided attention. There was an elderly gentleman with a cane, a retired math professor who had suffered a stroke 2 years ago. Next to him was a young woman, his daughter, who had become his primary caregiver. There was a young man in a wheelchair, an athlete whose career had been cut short by a brain hemorrhage. And there was an elderly couple. The wife was helping her husband, who moved with difficulty but refused to give up. In each of them Zenny saw a reflection of her own story. The same despair, the same fear, the same determination to keep fighting. And for each and every one of them, she had words of encouragement. Not empty platitudes, but a genuine conversation from someone who had walked the same path. Once everyone had arrived, Zenny stepped up to a small platform. A wave of excitement washed over her. It was the first time in a long time that she had spoken in public, even if it was only to a small audience. Good afternoon, dear friends, she began, trying to speak clearly, even though there was still a slight hesitancy in her speech. I am so happy to welcome you to the new Life Support Center. A year ago, I suffered a severe ischemic stroke. That event divided my life into before and after. Zenny looked around the room, seeing understanding and empathy in the eyes of the people who had gathered there. The stroke took a lot from me: my health, my familiar way of life, and my illusions about having a strong family. But it also gave me something priceless: a new perspective on life, true friends, and an understanding of what truly matters. She smiled, glancing over at Amani, who was standing by the wall. Our center was created not just for physical rehabilitation, although that is vitally important. We are here to help you return to a full life with new priorities, a new understanding of yourselves and the world around you, to support you in moments of despair, and to share in the joy of your small victories. The applause that filled the room touched Zenny deeply. For the first time she felt genuine appreciation. Not for her money, not for her position, but for something that she had truly done herself, pouring her heart and soul and her own personal experiences into it. As evening approached and most of the guests had left, an unexpected figure appeared in the doorway of the center: Langston, her ex-husband. He stood there hesitantly, as if he was unsure whether or not to come in. Noticing Zenny, he walked toward her. Hi, he said softly. Can we talk? Zenny nodded, gesturing toward a small office away from the main hall. Once they were alone, Langston remained silent for a long time, looking at his ex-wife as if he was seeing her for the very first time. You look great, he finally said, sounding completely sincere. Thank you, Zenny replied simply. You've changed too. It was true. Langston had lost weight. His features were sharper. There was more gray in his hair, but the biggest change was in his eyes. The familiar look of self-pity was gone. Something new had taken its place. I heard about your center, he said after a pause. Akira told me that you organized something for stroke patients. Yes, we officially opened today, Zenny confirmed. That's admirable. Langston spoke with obvious effort, carefully choosing his words. You always had a knack for organizing something significant. Zenny waited silently, sensing that he hadn't come just to congratulate her on her new venture. I wanted to apologize, Langston finally managed to say. For the Maldives, for how we acted. It was unforgivable. Why now? Zenny asked. It's been almost a year. Langston sighed. I guess I needed time to truly understand it, and to see that you were okay, that you were handling it. So if I hadn't been doing okay, you wouldn't have come, she clarified with a touch of irony. No, it's not like that, Langston said, shaking his head. It's just, when you filed for divorce, I was furious. I thought you were being ungrateful, cruel. I told the kids that it was just a consequence of the stroke, that you weren't yourself. But then when I had to start paying my own bills, finding an apartment, dealing with all the problems by myself, I started to realize how much you did for us and how little we appreciated it. Zenny remained silent, but a strange feeling of warmth spread through her, not from her ex-husband's words, but from the realization that she had been right all along, that her decision had not only changed her own life, but had also forced those around her to change as well. And then I heard about your center, Langston continued, about you helping other people who had gone through what you did, and I realized just how much stronger you are than me, than all of us. Langston, Zenny said thoughtfully, I don't hold any anger or resentment toward you. What happened was a necessary lesson for all of us. Can we fix things? He asked hopefully. Zenny shook her head. The past? No. But we can build a new future. Only now it will be on equal terms. What does that mean? Langston asked, looking confused. It means that I will no longer sacrifice myself for someone else's comfort. I won't solve other people's problems at the expense of my own desires. I won't pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. She smiled, looking out the window at the evening city. If you're ready to accept me for who I truly am, with my own priorities and my own boundaries, then we can try to build a new relationship. Not a family in the old sense, but something more honest and more equal. Langston was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. I'll try if you give me a chance. Not a chance, Zenny corrected him. An opportunity for both of us. As Langston left, promising to call in a few days, Imani poked her head into the office. Everything all right? More than all right, Zenny said with a smile. It seems like today is a day for reconciliation and new beginnings. They left the center together, stepping out into the warm summer evening. The city was going about its usual business. People hurrying home, cars buzzing, lights shining brightly in the windows of the apartment buildings. But for Zenny, everything looked different, brighter, more vibrant, more meaningful. You know what I'm thinking, she said as they walked along the park path. That sometimes you have to lose what you have in order to find what you truly need. Imani nodded knowingly. Like that old saying about closed doors and open doors. Exactly, Zenny agreed. When the door to my old life closed, I thought it was the end. But it turned out to be just the beginning. That evening, sitting on the balcony of her new condo with a cup of tea, Zenny thought about the strange irony of fate. She had lost her health and her family in the traditional sense. But she had gained something far more valuable, self-respect, a new purpose in life, and the understanding that life doesn't end at 52. Even after a stroke, it can be fulfilling, meaningful, and first and foremost, it can belong to herself. These days, helping other stroke patients find the strength to recover, Zenny often says, sometimes you have to lose what you have to find what you truly need. And she smiles, watching the despair in her listeners' eyes slowly fade away, replaced by the same fire of determination that had once saved her. Therefore, a truly awful illness, compounded by the disloyalty of those nearest and dearest to her, didn't spell the end for Zenia Sterling. Instead, it marked the commencement of a fresh existence, one far more deliberate and genuine. This new life accommodated hardship and suffering, but it also created space for happiness, exploration, and a profound and sincere affection. Most importantly, love for herself. Did you enjoy the tale? And what city are you tuning in from? I'd love to connect in the comments section. If you found the story engaging, you can support my work by sending a super thanks, which will help me continue to create and share similar stories. Your wonderful support means so much to me. I'm really eager to hear your thoughts and reactions to the story in the comments. On your screen right now, you'll see 2 more of my life stories that I highly recommend checking out. There's a wealth of content available on my channel. Please remember to subscribe so you don't miss anything. I look forward to sharing the next life story with you. With heartfelt love and respect.